And we're
From soul pieces to soul peace.
soul pieces.
From soul pieces to soul peace.
Soul pieces.
From soul pieces to soul peace.
Soul pieces. Good evening. Good evening. I hope you all loved my intro. I didn't know it was going to be so live and festive. But
I love it.
the gentleman that works with me, he's just as passionate about the things that I'm passionate about. So I love it. Anyhow, good evening to my guest, Miss Sabrina, and to my viewers that are now watching, those of you who may join us later or even watch this replay. Thank you for joining us tonight on this very intimate social issue, one that is of extreme importance. Sometimes it gets convoluted and everything else that's going on in the world, but it's still a very real issue. Tonight's guest is Miss Sabrina Manning, Prince Manning. She is just as passionate about domestic violence as, or if not more, than I am. And so um, she was a prime person to have on this broadcast on tonight to speak about this subject. Before we get started, what I do want to ask, and we've lost her for a second, but I think she'll be right back on. Before we get started, what I do want to ask is that for all of you that are watching tonight, yeah, it's okay. With technology, things happen, so it's okay. I want to ask all of you to please share this. Um, we know that domestic violence is a very sensitive subject, and everybody is not willing to share their experience or let it be known that they have been in a domestic violence situation or that they are currently in a domestic violence situation. The good thing about doing this in this manner is that people can be involved and no one necessarily has to know. However, and because of that reason, some people are really shy about what's happening or about their involvement in domestic violence. They don't want people to know. However, I'm asking you all to do me a favor and please share this broadcast with your friends, your family, and your followers. Okay? So before we get started, what I want to do is, if I can, share my screen and let's watch this little short clip on statistics because I do believe, um, let's see if I can share this. It is pertinent that we know how severe domestic violence is. Okay, bear with me for a second while I share this screen. Let me try. Yeah, there we go.
Last 4 days, in fact. On Monday, a woman was shot by her husband in Dawson County. It happened at a fire station in the parking lot after she drove there with her 2 young kids trying to get help. Her husband, Jeremy Gibson's in custody. These 2 cases shine a light on an issue that people say are often causes people to be afraid or ashamed to talk about. Caitlin Ross has that angle for us. Caitlin, this seems like so much tragedy in a week. We know it is prevalent in our state.
It's heartbreaking, Cheryl. If you look at the national statistics, it shows you just how big of a problem this is. 2 years ago, the CDC issued a report on female murder victims. The numbers were shocking. It showed more than half, 55%, died as a result of domestic abuse, primarily from their male partners. Black and Native American women were killed at a rate that was 2.5 times that of white or Asian women. We spoke to a domestic violence survivor from Fairburn who started a counseling service to help other survivors.
The men who are doing the killing and the abusing pretty much get a slap on the wrist. Even if they do kill the woman, they may only get 8 to 15.
Grant was shot 4 times by her husband in front of their children before he turned the gun on himself. She said he'd never been physically violent before, but was emotionally abusive. Here are some warning signs. If your partner tries to isolate you or tell you who you can and can't see, Grant says abuse can often start as a control issue and then escalate to violence.
All right, Caitlin, thanks a lot. Turning our attention now to...
Okay. So that was a very short clip, but I think it had very pertinent information. And oftentimes when we discuss domestic violence, we immediately go to the physical aspect of domestic violence, and domestic violence can actually start very subtle. There are very subtle signs. And if you're not mindful, you won't even know that this is a part of domestic violence. It can start very subtle and then it escalates to something more physical. And unfortunately, it ends a lot of times more frequently than we'd like it to in situations like this. Now, honestly, I don't really know how old this is, but we don't have to look very far to see very current issues and situations when it comes to domestic violence. Actually, if you follow Sabrina's page, or my From Soul Pieces to Soul Peace page this month, we are highlighting domestic violence, and I am showing, I am broadcasting incidences of domestic violence where unfortunately it has ended in death. So without further ado, we're going to do something different tonight. Typically, I am the interviewer. Emotional can be worse sometimes. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely, absolutely. Because our physical scars will heal, but those emotional scars, people don't even know that we have those, and sometimes they follow us for a very long time. So for those of you that have followed my page, you know that most of the time I'm the one that is doing the interviewing. But tonight we've decided to do something different. This idea was not my idea. However, I love the idea. And so some of you will learn something that you may not know about me. But without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Sabrina.
You will learn something that you may not know. Hi there.
Hello.
I was trying to multitask and bring up something that I could actually type on. So
My name is Sabrina Manning Prince, and I actually wrote a book under a pseudonym or a pen name, Faye Mann. So some people might refer to me as that when they think of domestic violence, and some people just simply know me as Sabrina. So it is an honor, Latanya, to be able to interview you, to switch it up a little.
Thank you.
And for everyone out there, this is totally unscripted. I did not rehearse the questions, and she did not rehearse the answers. So we're just going to talk because once you've been through something like this, and I do get choked up sometimes. Once you've been through something like this, you don't need a script. You've lived it.
You've lived it.
This is not Law and Order. This is real life.
Mhm.
So we're going to get started here. I just need to simply ask you, ma'am, at what age did you first experience domestic violence?
Oh, wow. Um, I would have to say my very first experience with domestic violence had to be when I was probably 16, somewhere around 16.
Can you imagine the number of young girls out there who are experiencing this right now?
You know, sometimes it's unfathomable. In fact, now that you are causing me to actually go back and remember these instances, at that time I did not identify what happened as domestic violence. I would have never known. And that may be the case now with a lot of young ladies. They don't even recognize what's happening to them as an act of domestic violence.
And one thing that we need to point out is that sometimes the behavior that we see, the acceptable behavior we see at home, becomes the acceptable behavior in our lives. So when we see something that might appear to look wrong because it was right in our lives,
Mhm.
it's not wrong.
Right.
And sometimes that tends to be a pattern of abuse. It tends to be something that's that generational curse. So, do you feel that that could have been something in your life? And believe me, if you choose not to answer these questions, I'm perfectly fine with it.
No, listen, I've already had my come to Jesus moments, and I'm really okay with any question that you ask me.
Okay.
I will um, mention this disclaimer. I realize that a lot of my friends and family are aware of what I do about my platform. A lot of them may not know some of the information that I will share tonight, but I'm really okay because I believe there's a greater cause. At this point in my life, I'm no longer ashamed about anything, and I'm hoping that something that I share will be helpful to some other young lady or a young man, because we didn't mention this yet. I know we're just getting started. Women are not the only ones who are victims of domestic violence. Men, we don't hear about it often with men as often, but they too can be victims of domestic violence. And I think I may have gone off a little bit on a tangent, so I'm
You're
sorry.
fine. You're fine. We can be all over the place
Okay.
because wherever we go tonight, someone will hear something that they can use in their lives to help them to get out.
Hmm. Was there a question, I'm sorry, that you asked
The
that I
question was, do you think there was something that maybe you saw, a generational kind of thing, that led you to allow this kind of abuse without recognizing it at first?
hmm, when I think about domestic violence, be it the abuser or the abused, I realize there has to be a progenitor somewhere. It started with someone. Whether it for the abuser, perhaps they saw someone in their family that abused individuals, and for whatever reason, they felt like it was something that whether they willfully chose to do it or not, is something that happened. And for the abused, there had to be a progenitor as well that allowed it or decided to stay. And so I do believe. I do remember. I recall seeing instances with in my family. I do recall seeing it. And the individual really tried to, for lack of a better word, downplay the situation. Um, I want to say this may be common. I want to say I immediately attempted to step in as a child to protect the person that I love. And they said to me, no, you stay over there. It's okay. And I did not understand after this was over. It didn't get very violent. However, I'm not excusing the fact that it happened. I saw what I saw, and the individual did what they did. Um, I did not understand why we did not immediately leave that situation. And so for me, that was the beginning of it's okay. This is what happens. This becomes a normal, or it's been normalized.
And it really has. It
Mhm.
has. And that's very courageous of you to admit that you saw something. And believe it or not, just one instance in seeing something like that's branded in your mind can cause you to be accepting of something like that in the future without your even being aware of it. It can happen.
Yes, you're right. You're
I,
right.
I I see you. I see you. So you had something you want to say. Go ahead and add to that.
No, I don't. Trust me, I'm looking at a comment. One of our viewers' comments, and it just made me chuckle a little bit. So,
Okay.
but no, I'm fine. I'm fine.
Okay. So at 16, you've accepted this abuse. Did you stay in the relationship?
I did.
How many years did you stay?
Probably, probably 2 additional years. It only happened that one time. And though I'm saying this, I have to also put a disclaimer out there again. I was not able to recognize that it was domestic violence at that time. That was the only time that it happened. However, it happened. The truth, the truth remains the same that it happened. It did not happen again, but it did happen that one time with
Okay.
this individual.
So what do you think caused him to put the brakes on and not allow that to happen again?
This particular individual was a friend to many of my male cousins that I hung around. I was always around gentlemen. My male cousins were probably some of my best friends around that age, and all of my male cousins were they were friends with him, and I do believe several of them were around at this time when it happened. So though I didn't, I wasn't, I didn't have a reaction other than shock that it happened. The guys kind of came to my defense. And I think they let him know that that was unacceptable behavior and that he could not do that. They were not going to allow him to do that. So I didn't have that issue with him again.
So are you saying possibly that if family members knew how to safely step in and let the abuser know we're not going to allow this without killing them, okay?
Right.
Without killing them,
Right.
let them know, we're not tolerating this. This is not acceptable. What if it were your daughter, your mother, your sister, your cousin? Would you do this to her?
Exactly. I would say I would have to agree with that statement. And let's just say I'm happy that at this point I didn't have to worry about that happening again with him. Now further on later in life I did experience other incidences that became more violent. But with that particular incident, that one incident and that encounter with my male cousins, I didn't have that incident with him anymore. And I've
Right.
never heard of him being violent with anyone after that.
Lesson learned.
Hmm.
I've heard some older women say, you just got to stand up to them one time. That is not always the wise thing to do,
That is not sound advice.
because even the shortest man can be more powerful than the tallest woman
Mhm.
because of the physical strength of a man.
Right.
So you kind of have to be mindful of that, because one fell swoop with the hand and you could fall back, hit your head on something, and you might not even be dead, but because he thought he killed you, he might kill you
Mhm.
and kill himself.
Mhm.
So that's something that you really need to think about. And we'll talk about that later on as a means of escape. How do I get away
Right.
from an
Right.
abuser?
Mhm.
Okay. So you said later on you encountered domestic violence again.
I did. I
And what
did.
age was this?
I want to say I was in my early 20s. Um, my early 20s, the first sign of, and this was a long term relationship, my first sign of what I now know was a first sign was, let me take that back. Let me retract a little bit. The first physical sign is being snatched by my arm. However, over time, I realized that he was doing other things that were signs that we don't frequently talk about, because when we think about domestic violence, we immediately go to the physical aspect of it. However, um, he was very insecure, he was very jealous. So there was emotional, and someone did mention that in the comments. There was emotional abuse. Um, and that set the stage that led up to the physical. And at that age, I really thought I could love it out of them. I could love it away. And if I showed them how much I loved them, that the abuse would eventually stop. The emotional abuse and the physical abuse would stop. However, it only got worse. It got
You know, Tina Turner said in her song, "What's love got to do with it?" And when it comes to an abuser, it's as if they are overcome by the same demon.
hmm
And you can love and love and love and love and love. But there's something that's missing. And what do you think might have been missing in your relationship with this abuser? Something that pertains to him.
that's really difficult to say, because as I learned, that family, his side of the family, his mother and I were really close. And honestly, this particular story could go on forever. What I learned after I had been in a relationship with him for a little while, after that time had passed, what I learned was that he was extremely violent to his first wife. I also learned that his father was extremely violent to his wife.
Mhm.
And in fact, the mother is the one that gave me a lot of information. And I just could not believe it. Although she was sharing some of her experiences with me, and I could actually mirror my life to hers with her son. I still thought it's going to be different though. This time it's going to be different. But as I was earlier, I was talking about a progenitor of this type of behavior. His father was the progenitor, and he admired everything about his father.
Unfortunately, that is a cycle.
Mhm.
There's oftentimes too many young boys and men who have learned the behavior from their fathers.
Mhm.
I've actually seen some who struggled with being different, but they didn't seek to change their behavior to do things differently. So therefore, they became their fathers.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so you're knowing that your boyfriend's mother had gone through this. Did you see that she did enough to encourage you to get out?
Hmm. Did I see that she did enough to encourage me to get out? I'm
Or
gonna
did
say no. In fact, she never encouraged me to leave. Her advice leaned towards preparation in the event he left. She never encouraged me to leave.
So now that you think about this, and you see someone in a situation like what you've been in, oh, he's a great guy. He's a great provider. He has bought her a house, a brand new car. She dresses very well. She's educated. He takes care of her. Girl, you don't need to leave that man.
Oh my God. This is the
What?
stuff that's been said too.
So, can you see that maybe your boyfriend's mother was suffering from battered women syndrome, where she couldn't even muster up the words or the courage to tell you to leave her son?
I can see that. Um, in hindsight, when I look back at that pattern, what was happening then, um, and to be honest, I'm not really sure what happened. What really brought on the demise of their marriage? I'm not really sure because I can't recall her mentioning that. What I do know is that he basically had the her husband basically had the freedom to do whatever he wanted. People were telling her what he was doing. She confronted him about it, and that's when the abuse started. Basically, how that marriage ended, I'm not really sure. But what I do know is that her son blamed the mother and chose to go with the father. He never once mentioned anything about how his father abused his mom. He never once said anything about it. And what I find to be, what I've noticed to be kind of classical about gentlemen who are abusers, whenever the woman makes a step to leave, whether she leaves momentarily, um, and ends up coming back at some point or another, the theatrics are so, and I call them theatrics now. At the time, I didn't think they were theatrics. I really thought this person was pouring out their heart. They're really going to change this time. And as you mentioned earlier, it's a cycle because I would leave. I would leave. There was no hesitation in me leaving, but he would cry. Oh, I'm never going to do it again. I promise you, I'm never going to do it again. I'm sorry. And I would go back. So it was a cycle for years. It was a cycle that went on for years.
Yeah, I mean, pure crocodile tears.
Mhm.
That's essentially what it was. And
Absolutely.
and men like this gentleman and others of that caliber, they tend to be misogynistic, and they undercover don't like women. It's not a homosexual thing.
Right.
Don't like women, don't value them. They're very chauvinistic,
Hmm.
and you have no voice.
Right.
And and they want you to look pretty, but they don't want you to get noticed by anybody else.
Listen, you are speaking about classical signs in this individual.
Mhm.
Um, you asked me something about what his mother's advice was. I will tell you, he was the provider. He never wanted me to work. He had standards. Not that, I'm, physically unattractive. However, um, he had, there were standards that he had that he shared with me. He wanted me to look a certain way. And mind you, I wasn't working. I stayed home. So I had to look a certain way every single day. And then when we went out places, I had a habit of reading whenever we were riding. I would read. And I just stopped reading one day and I just wanted to look around and see what was happening. And if we stopped at a red light and a car was beside us and me and the person just happened to make eyes, I knew this person. Um, he would follow me at work and go from window to window when I was working in healthcare. Oh my God, it has been, the stories are unbelievable. Let me just say this, this is unbelievable. And I just remember, Sabrina, I honestly remember feeling sorry for him, thinking, oh my God, he's never had anybody to love him. He's never had anybody to care for him. And it didn't matter what I did. He was never satisfied. Never, never, ever satisfied. I think, too, I really do believe his entire goal was to reduce me to nothing.
Mhm.
Reduce me to absolutely nothing.
And they have a tendency to have an insatiable desire for you to be perfect at all times.
Yeah.
You have to be perfect. And then there's the element of competition
Uh,
where they're competing with you. And here you are trying to show them this is love. But I asked you earlier, what did you think was missing? And oftentimes, what's missing is they cannot love anybody else because they don't love themselves.
cells. Yeah.
And
After,
then,
I'm sorry,
and,
go ahead.
and I would say that a lot of men are broken, abusers are broken. They have had trauma in their lives.
Definitely.
So they project all of that on the one person that's supposed to be the key person in their lives. You're the closest person, you're the punching bag.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're the sounding board, but you don't have a voice.
Yeah.
I get to talk. You listen,
Yeah.
you
You
know?
hit it on the head. You hit the nail on the head. Um, and this, again, this is all in hindsight. I realized this, and that's what actually gave me the courage and the wherewithal to leave when I realized this person, they cannot love me because they don't love themselves.
Mhm.
They don't even like themselves. And
There you
because
go.
they refuse to address that part, the only power that they have is stripping someone else of their, or demonstrating their power over someone else. And he did that somewhat by isolating me from everybody. I had no friends or family here. People who did befriend me, he really tried to ruin those relationships. Um, yeah, he basically tried to ruin those relationships. And every
Talk
single time, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, no, you try to run the relationship, you said. Talk a bit more about the kind of control that you experienced.
Um, Control in every way imaginable. The financing, because he did not want me to work. I did not work. And because he worked out of town, um, I would sometimes get a job. I don't know how I thought I could do that because I wouldn't know when he was coming back. And he'd find out where I was working. So he'd come up there and he'd make such a scene and embarrass me so badly that I would leave. I would quit. So he controlled the financing. He tried to control what I wore, my appointments to get my hair done. He'd sit there and monitor how my hair was being done, who all was watching me while I was getting my hair done. He tried to control all relationships. At some point, my father and I tried to forge a relationship. We were beginning to bond or try to bond. And if I got too much attention, he would feel some kind of way about it. We would travel home to visit my family. And if I got too much attention with my family or my male cousins coming around, because we were still somewhat close, although I wasn't living in the area anymore, and if they all came around, I mean, there was one time I went home and I left the very same night because he was upset about all the attention that I was getting. And I think what it is, this is kind of classical. As a nurse, we have to frequently get educated on signs and symptoms of domestic violence and how to interview patients without alerting the potential abuser. We don't know for sure, but the suspect is that he's an abuser. They want to stick around so they can hear the narrative and they can try to control the narrative. He was classic about doing that.
Hmm.
He was classic
Most,
about
most definitely. So, in the midst of all of this, you're being abused.
it.
Were you a mother at that time? Did you have children?
I did. My this is probably one of the worst incidents of domestic violence ever had to experience. I'm not really sure what perpetrated this incident, how it started, but I was very, very pregnant. I was probably 6, 7 months. And initially, when the physical part started between us, I would fight back because I've always been a fighter. So I fought him back. And as you stated earlier, it only made him more angry. We were the same height. So it wasn't that I was afraid. I was not intimidated by his size or anything like that. But to fight him back made him even more angry. And he was going to prove to me that I was not stronger than him. He shut off the AC to the home, closed all the windows, so it got extremely hot. Mind you, I'm six and a half, 7 months pregnant, and after a while, I felt myself passing out. I remember laying on my back, and he grabbed a knife and had it at my throat. Mhm. I wasn't expecting this response. He
It's
said,
okay. Take your time.
"I'll kill you." And for whatever reason, he did get up and let me go. And I ran out of the house to my neighbors. And as I'm banging on their door for help, I passed out. I did pass out. I woke up um, in the back of an ambulance. I came to in the back of an ambulance. And I did have physical bruises on my face and my upper body. And I remember hearing the paramedics as they are trying to start an IV say, whoever did this is going to jail. Someone mentioned in our comments there's an issue with the court system. He never went to jail that night.
There's a definite problem with the court system.
He did
There are
not.
many women like you. What happened to you? And in my case, I never really went to the police because I was always trying to protect him. And I'm not going to get into my story, but there's no reason why he should not have been arrested. Now, that was a couple of, maybe 2 decades ago.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, things have changed to some degree now, but there's still not enough to protect victims of domestic violence. Because when you start hearing the stories and the reports, you might hear, oh, he had a charge before.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he did this to his first wife or girlfriend. So there was no reason why he should not have gone.
Right.
No reason.
Unfortunately, the victims are often re-victimized by the court systems. Um, and this is why it's so difficult, why women hesitate, or victims, let me say, this is why victims often hesitate to even seek help because um, they're often re-victimized. You know, you're made to feel very small. The questions are somewhat demeaning. They can be demeaning, like, why would you stay this long? Or, you know, why didn't you leave before now? And I think you and I could probably agree that a lot of advocates have said leaving is the most dangerous time for the abused.
My phone was about to die. I'm sorry. Just I'm
Listen,
like, please don't do this to me. Okay, hold on.
it's technology, things happen.
Oh, I'm back on. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I was like, we cannot do this tonight. Not tonight. We're not doing this. So I heard you say that people will oftentimes ask questions like, girl, I don't know how you stayed because I would have left. That couldn't have been me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Have you ever said that to yourself when you were younger? No man's ever going to hit me.
I have.
I did too.
Mhm.
Because at 16, I had a 16-year-old cousin, and I'm just a couple of months older than she is. She was being abused by her boyfriend, and I said, "Oh, that would never happen to me." But quite honestly, you don't know what you will do until you're in that situation.
To your end.
And our feelings and desires and the thoughts of love will make us want to please someone
Mhm.
that will never be pleased.
Right. Right.
Never, ever, because the problem lies within.
Yeah.
And then it's really kind of not loving or compassionate for people to say those things that they say.
Mhm.
Girl, you should just leave. Of course you should just leave.
Of course.
But there is a process to leaving. There's some things that must take place and be in place before one leaves. So
Absolutely.
you got out. So how did you get out? And I like to use the phrase, the question, how did you plan your escape? Because being in an abusive relationship is very much akin to being in prison.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Listen, you can I really believe that the abuser has some type of inclination when you're tired. And they start to really, if they weren't sticking to you before, they're really starting to stay close to you so they can monitor your every move. Now, for myself at the time, I was pregnant, ended up having my daughter. So, and then my other two children came to live with me. So here I am, a young person in a city where I have no family and friends, no family and few friends. And I have these three small children. So it looks like it's very dire for me. Where am I going? Because I don't have money. He has all the money. I have three children, and my thoughts were, I don't want to take these three kids and move into somebody's home. And there were steps before I finally left. But like I said to you, what I realized was there's nothing I can do to make this individual stop doing what he's doing. That's a him problem. He's got to fix that. There's nothing I can do to do that. And so I just made up my mind. This is what I'm gonna do. I happened to the job that I was at. What I did was I had planned to put all my stuff in storage, and I was just gonna go stay with a friend. She said to me, "Listen, you and those kids can come and stay with me." And I said, "Okay, I'll do that." Well, what I went to this job that I was at, and I was asking every man on the job, "Do you have a truck? Do you have a truck?" Because he was gone. Nobody had a truck. He ended up coming back. Remember, I think I said earlier, he would never tell me when he's coming back, so I wouldn't know. And I ended up leaving with whatever I could put in my car. I left everything. Mind you, I shared with you too that my father and I was just forging a relationship. He had given me some very expensive jewelry, which I had to hide because my ex would take everything of value. Now, and mind you too, I shared with you all that he didn't want me to work. So I didn't have any money, any earned income. I had money coming in that he knew nothing about. I would hide my bank account information. And so I had a little bit of money. Um, and that's what I used to get away with. I just took my clothes, what I could put in my car, and my children and I went to live with a friend who knew what was happening. She was also aware of his previous relationship. So she knew. His family knew because his first wife let the family know. They saw the bruising on her, but none of them ever said anything to me about, and they never talked to him. They never talked to him about what his behavior, what he was doing, and they never said anything to me. But that's how
So
I'm leaving.
in a court of law, when someone is riding in a car, maybe five kids are riding in the car and one person gets killed, what normally happens to the other people that were not the shooters? Do they get charged with something?
Yes,
Okay, they do. So when family members ride the wave of an abusive relationship and they see this happening, they see something and say nothing, there's a degree of guilt
absolutely,
and responsibility and accountability on their parts.
absolutely.
They don't have to let him know that they're trying to help you escape. But now herein lies the problem. Sometimes the victim is so afraid, she tells him things that
Mhm.
she should not reveal to him. because it's only going to make her situation worse. So at some point, you have to stop sharing with him.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to feed his ego, but don't feed him information,
Absolutely.
because he will use that information against you.
And unfortunately, the sad thing is there have been so many sacrificial lambs before the laws have changed. Because as you stated earlier, this incident that I'm speaking about, this happened 20 odd years ago, over 20 odd years ago. There have been so many sacrificial lambs before that time and in between that time that have made laws just a little bit tougher, just a little bit. But how many times have we seen stories where women have been, they paid the ultimate sacrifice with their life, and you find out there was a restraining order. They did all the right things. But here's the thing. There's something about us women that we really do hope for the best. And if we don't cut off communication altogether, we let them get into our ears, we believe them, and their whole goal has been to do us harm anyway. Somehow they're gonna make you pay. And unfortunately, I had somewhat of an experience, because this individual that we've been speaking about on my behalf, they went to prison. Eventually, they did go to prison. They verbally threatened me. I recorded it, and the authorities heard it. They ushered me and my children. They came to my house and got me, took me and my children to a battered women's shelter until he went to jail. I had to be escorted upstairs to the courtroom, and after it was over, I had to be escorted downstairs because his family rallied around him. They saw the bruising, they saw all of that. However, they rallied around him. He did 2 years in prison. Afterwards, because we had a child together, and I'm thinking that this man he's changed his ways. And he did not. He said to me, this man picked me up by my throat and told me if I go back to prison, it will be for killing you. And I knew then we would never, ever have anything else to do with one another. We share a child, but we wouldn't have anything else to do with one another. Because even after 2 years, all he did was sit there and think about what I did, which was testify against him. Not that he did something for me to testify against. He was the victim. And unfortunately, our hearts will lead us to hope for the best. And after some time has passed, we believe that these individuals will change. I'm not saying that people won't change. However, when people show you who they are, believe them. Believe what they're showing you.
Especially in the cases of domestic violence, you have to accept it for what it is, because all it takes is one time, and your life could be over.
Yes.
Just one time, and that could be it.
Yes.
When men lose their jobs, when they can't find employment, when they abuse drugs and alcohol, when they become so enraged over something that you had no control over,
you know nothing about,
but you're the punching bag. It can happen. So now you've shared your story, major pieces of your story that some of your family and friends probably never ever knew anything about. Do you feel safe sharing your story? And I know that you had to think about this before we agreed to do this. So I know you've thought about it.
I do. It is very intimate. And sometimes now, doing what I do with From Soul Pieces to Soul Piece, I've often heard, in fact, I've heard a former administrative member on our team say to me, "You're so strong. You're such a strong person." And they never knew. They didn't know this part about my life. It's not something that you go around talking about consistently. However, I do thank you for just reminding me that October was Domestic Violence Awareness Month. A lot of us are on social media, so we see things here and there, and it triggered the fact that this is still a real issue. I'm not experiencing it now, and I thank God that I lived through it. My children lived through it. We live to tell the tale. However, if we can prevent some woman from going through this, that's what I would prefer happen. That someone will listen to what we've said, pick up some nuggets from what we've shared, examine their own lives, and make a decision. And I'm not really sure if you were able to hear me before when I said, um, and I'm sure you would agree that, because I think you mentioned it, a woman has to have a plan. It's not for people to say, you got to get out. They already know that, but they can't just leave like that. They've got to have a plan. They've got to have a plan. And that when a woman decides to leave, that is the most dangerous time for that woman and her children, if she has children. That's very
And
dangerous.
quite honestly, leaving can be very dangerous. And that's why there has to be an escape plan,
Yes.
a very well thought out. And everyone's plan will probably be different,
Mhm.
but there are some key components of this plan that you must have. You need to have in place some proof to show that you've been abused. Take photos of the abuse.
Mhm.
If you can record him verbally abusing you, be very careful though. Make sure, you don't want him to have control of your phone where he can actually go to your voicemail or what have you. You need to be able to be slick about it.
Mhm.
It might not hurt to have another cell phone. And when you decide to leave, you don't need to have a track or trace of anything that can be tied back to you. If you have a credit card, you need to draw the money out of, a bank card, draw the money out, dwindle it down somehow, or somehow move that to a prepaid card that cannot be tracked,
Mhm.
because they become super sleuths.
Yeah.
They do. But you have to outsmart the criminal because he's, in essence, a criminal.
Right.
I mean, if he did this to someone else, he could be guilty of aggravated battery, aggravated assault, terroristic threats and acts. I mean, those things are real.
Right.
Not often are you going to see it immediately classed that way with domestic violence unless there's some proof.
Right.
Photos, videos. You need to have a very tight knit core support group. And let me talk about that support group.
Yes.
You
Please.
might think that your mutual friends are going to support you. Mm-mm. Some of them don't believe that he's doing what you say he's doing to you. So when you get to where you're going, they can expose your whereabouts.
Ooh.
Very, very dangerous.
Mhm.
I mean, siblings will even give away the whereabouts because, oh man, that's my dude right there. That's my homeboy.
And
I
don't
don't.
kids. He just wants to see his children. He
Yeah.
just talk to his children.
Mhm. You have to have that in place. You want to have access to telephone numbers so that you can call directly to the police department. If somehow 911, you want to have a code. I have one of my very close friends. I know that she doesn't like cats. So I told her if I'm trying to get out, I'm going to call her and ask her, how is your cat doing?
Mhm.
She knows then to call for someone to come check on me.
Yes.
You need those systems in place. Do
Absolutely.
not drive the same vehicle. If you're working, do your level best to beg off time from work
Mhm.
because you don't need to be there. Your coworkers, oh, he's a nice guy. And if you don't tell them what's going on, they'll think it's okay to tell him where you are. Your life depends upon all of this.
Absolutely.
You must have a plan. So people telling you to just leave, it might not be the best thing to do at that moment. You might have to plan your escape, and you can plan it overnight.
Mhm.
But trying to leave an abuser while he's there and present and alert and not inebriated or drugged out or something, you're in a very, very volatile situation.
Very volatile. Yes, absolutely. And if you
Very, very much so. So I'm glad that you got out.
I'm glad that
I'm
you
glad that I got out too. You know, we are not just survivors, we're victors.
yes.
Because I look at the things that you've done in your life. You did not sit and wallow in your pity. You're an entrepreneur. You work, you're a nurse.
Yeah.
You are a mother,
Mhm.
a great grandmother, a great granddaughter. I mean, you take care of your grandmother.
Yeah.
You have found a way to be a caregiver for many people. I can say you're a bit of caregiver of me to some degree,
Yeah.
you know, and vice versa. You are not just a victim. You stood up. You
Amen.
went out. You fought through the pain.
Yeah.
You've put those pieces together, and now you have your soul peace.
Yes.
That is powerful. It's impactful. You have shared something that's very personal, very intimate with the world.
Mhm.
Hey, this is Facebook. Somebody's going to see it.
Yeah.
And I'll just throw this out. There are women who dare not show up on this live.
Hmm.
Some of them won't show up because they don't need other people seeing them, especially if they're victims, looking at this live because that could cause them more danger
Right.
later on.
Right.
Okay. There's some women that don't want to be on here because they're afraid that somebody's going to think that they're being abused when they're not.
Hmm.
So, whatever people's reasons are for not being on the live, much respect to you.
Right. And I
But
do.
we beg of you to share it after the fact. You
Right.
can share it privately, you can share it publicly. But this message is something that has gotten worse.
It has.
The
It.
pen, yeah, the pandemic afforded abusers a nice little playground.
Mhm.
When we couldn't go out and about, some women were locked in with their killers
Right.
because
Right.
some women lost their lives. And there are some men who are such haters of their wives and girlfriends and want to inflict pain on her that they would kill her children and themselves just to make her suffer.
Oh.
This is not something that we can play with. It's not something we need to be silent about. And
Right.
I appreciate you so very much for allowing me to join you on this live so that we
Absolutely.
can share this information. It's critical. And every minute, just imagine, we're sitting here. Some woman has been killed or is being abused right now. It could be your neighbor,
Mm.
it could be your sister, it could be your mother. And age does not matter.
Oh.
There are some women that have been abused their entire lives, but they stay, especially the older generation.
Mm.
It was acceptable back then for them to just have babies, stay home, not do anything. Do as I tell you, woman.
Mhm.
Cook my food. And there's nothing wrong with a wife being submissive to her husband, but
Absolutely.
there's a fine line between submission and control,
Right.
submission and dominance.
Right.
You have to know the difference.
And we spoke
If
earlier how subtle domestic violence will start. Not too many times will the abuser just come right out of the gate abusing you physically. Excuse me. It will start very subtle. And unfortunately, someone may think, oh, that's so cute. He cares about me. He's doing this. No, if it's borderline in control, it's only going to escalate. It's going to escalate.
and some women equate that kind of attention to love,
Yes, we
and
do.
it's not. It's really not.
It's really not.
And there are a couple of movies that all of you have probably seen or heard of. And this month, I would like to encourage you to kind of just take the time to reflect on those movies and what took place in those movies. And if you know someone who's being abused, and if there's any way that you can talk with them privately, encourage them to watch the movies, to see somebody else going through what they went through, and maybe something will trigger and spark some action on their part.
Right.
The movie Enough.
Ah.
I mean, a man with money and power connected to the police officers who could manipulate things.
That's somebody's reality.
Yes, sleeping with the enemy. Oh, he gave her the world. But he wanted control and dominance. She had to fake her own death in order to get away. She had a plan. She had a plan. Unfortunately, in Enough, Jennifer Lopez had a plan. And unfortunately, hers had to do with killing him because he was going to kill her. We don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
Try your best to not get to that point, because sometimes the system won't work with you. They're not going to see you. And I will say this one thing about myself. When I could have killed my ex-husband. Had I killed him, I would have been found guilty of probably of premeditated murder, because I actually thought about what I was doing, and I would have told them this. And I was woman enough to deal with the consequences, because I would have thought about my actions leading up to that point.
Right.
So more than likely, they would have said it was premeditated. Oh, and his family, and they probably would have fought for that.
Sure.
You know, because it's their son.
Yeah.
You know, and they would have lost their loved one. And I'm glad that that did not happen.
Right.
But the classic domestic violence movie is The Burning Bed with Farrah Fawcett.
Oh my God. Wow.
Those are three very powerful movies.
Yeah.
Very powerful movies that I think could be used as auxiliary teaching points to help victims to see you can get out. And you have to plan your escape.
Yes.
You have to plan your escape. So again, we're a little over our time, and we could talk about this for hours. And I thank you for allowing me to interview you and to get into your world of what you endured, and glad that you still have that beautiful smile.
Thank you. Listen, you made me very comfortable. I was not expecting to tear up because I hadn't really. Oftentimes I do think about what I've experienced, and I thank God, especially now when I see stories where young women have died. I thank God that I lived through that. A couple of things I did want to mention before we end, or at least before we look at some of the comments and address those, because we do have quite a few comments here. So thank you all for joining us. We have to be mindful. There's a whole lot of awareness about domestic violence. Those who are the abused are not the only ones who are watching. Abusers are too. So your advice that we have to be very wise for those who are in these type situations, have to be very wise about their escape plan and what they're going to do. Yes, they do have to, because the ones who are the victims are not the only ones who are watching things like this and other avenues of domestic violence awareness. Also, too, when you were mentioning particularly my life, what I did not think about at the time that I was being abused was those attached to me. I was only thinking about me at the time. You have to think about your family, your children. I remember it's so hurtful now when I think about it. My grandmother said to me, Tanya, that man's gonna kill you. And I didn't think about the distress it was probably causing her when she knew what I was dealing with. So, and you don't think about the impact that it has on, if you have children, things that your children witness, because now you become the progenitor of what your child will either allow or what they will perpetrate on someone else. So those are things that I just wanted us to be mindful about too when it comes to domestic violence. I thank you all that have watched, and we are going to go through some of these comments before we end tonight. Someone said there should be a continuation, and actually we plan on doing something for the rest of the month. Next week there is um, a planned airing with another survivor of domestic violence. And of course, we don't want to just share our stories, but to give you all to point you in a direction if you find yourself in this position. On the screen, you see the National Domestic Violence Hotline. I live here in the Tampa Bay area. If any of you are watching and you live in this area, you can always call 211. You can call that number to get some information if you need some help. Universally, you can always call 911. They are attached to or associated with advocates and other entities that can help you if you find yourself in a situation. So, Loretta,
Latanya, excuse me, let me interject. On that National Domestic Violence Hotline, they have the coolest feature. Once you get on their website, if you go on their website, you can easily click off and there will be no trace that you went to that website.
really?
Yes.
Wow. And again, remember we discussed how things have changed now over the years, how it seems to be slow progress when you think about the number of women who have lost their life to domestic violence. And one thing I also wanted to mention too was a statistic that I found astounding and sad. Every 11 minutes, a woman dies from domestic violence. Every 11 minutes. That is unfathomable. It's really difficult to digest that someone is being victimized and loses their life every 11 minutes due to domestic violence. But because society is becoming more aware of the urgency behind this, then there are steps like that there are no traces. There are um, facilities here in my area. I'm sure there's somewhere you are, Sabrina. And if there's a phone number, a local phone number in your area that you want to share with our viewers, please feel free to do that as well.
Well, let me just tell you, in this area in Albany, Georgia, there is Liberty House of Albany. In Tifton, there's Ruth's Cottage. In Valdosta, there's a battered women's shelter. And of course, you can always call this number, the toll free hotline number, and they will direct you to your local shelter.
Thank you so much. Let's go through some of these comments before we end for tonight. I am so grateful for all you ladies participating. And thank you too for those of you who have shared. And it hasn't just been ladies that's been on here. There have been some men that have been on here as well. So let's see. Let's go through some of these. Miss Tanika Wise, my new friend. I went through domestic violence at a young age from an insecure man. Prayer helped. Yeah, it's something when you're dealing with an insecure man because a lot of times they will resort to domestic violence because of their own lack of security. Let's see. What was your most deepest fear? Someone asked. I think probably, if I'm sure that question was directed to me. My deepest fear was dying, really.
Mhm.
Dying either in front of my children or my children dying along with me. And honestly, probably that no one would come looking for me because I had been isolated from my family. Oh, Miss Tanisha, thank you so much for joining, Miss Tanisha. Psychological imprisonment.
Mhm.
Exactly. And the effects of that psychological imprisonment lasts a long time, not forever, but it lasts a long time. Dying, yes, ma'am, Miss Tamika. That was my biggest fear. Someone says some women don't survive the fight, and we can see those statistics now. It is so heartbreaking. It's sometimes unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable the things that we see. I see some of these stories and I shed a few tears like, what happened? Didn't know. Um, how did it get this far? And I have to remember that I've been there too. You've been there. And of course, you don't want to see the worst in this person. They can show you the absolute worst and you don't want to see that. You're hoping that they're going to change, that they will look at the fact that you love them, that you care for them, that you're supporting them, and that they will change. But again, as we discussed tonight, that's they're having a deeper problem, something that you can't fix. Your love is not going to fix. Let's
I'd like to call it the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde.
definitely, definitely. With this individual, that's exactly how I describe them too, because my family loved him, Sabrina. They absolutely loved him. And my
Mhm.
father did too until there were subtle changes in me. This, if I can't have you, nobody can attitude. Absolutely. Insecurity, jealousy, those are not good combinations at all.
And then the
You,
reverse psychology to get you to come back is, I know I'm not good enough for you.
uh-huh, uh-huh. Miss Tamika also says, I went through domestic violence. Okay, we saw that one. There was someone else on here. Oh, Mr. Anthony says, vicarious responsibility. Thank you, Mr. Anthony, for chiming in. Uh, okay, here we go. The problem is the court system. They don't protect victims. Over the years, they haven't done a very good job. They haven't. Oh,
Something else that I wanted to mention, abusers can come from all walks of life.
mm-hmm.
You have ministers, you have law enforcement officers, you have judges, you have doctors. No one can say that this man won't abuse because he's this kind of person. Absolutely not.
Right.
And let me share this very powerful story. I actually sat in the courtroom while this man was being tried. I sat there because the victim didn't have a lot of people representing her.
Mm-hmm.
She was a doctor. He would go to her job and follow her around when she made her rounds in the ER. Now, her coworkers would tell this story after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
They violated a federal law, HIPAA. He had no business going around with them. But apparently, they felt some type of fear of him and they never reported it.
Oh, wow.
She was killed. They were able to use his cell phone, track his cell phone to help determine his fate.
Oh, my God.
Now, he got 40 years if my memory serves me. But those are some very dangerous situations.
Yeah.
Somebody has to stand up and say something. You don't have to confront the abuser.
Right.
Let law enforcement know. Let the authorities at the places of work know.
Yeah.
But somebody needs to say something.
And this is the thing. This is the thing. We have to, for those who have been abused, you have to put aside any shame or guilt that may be associated with this because your life is at stake. I did have, eventually, I had what became my family and my situation were those at my job because he would come to the job crying and, oh, I want you back and don't leave me. And my boss finally, because it was affecting my performance at work, I was absent from work. He wouldn't keep our daughter. I actually went to work with my daughter in tow. Strangers were like, if she, I'll keep your daughter. People who are my friends to this day. But my supervisor finally said, do you want me to call the police? And I said, yes, yes, call the police. You have to let people know. Some people may turn a blind eye, but there is someone who will be filled with enough compassion and kindness and care to intervene if that intervention is just calling 911 when you cannot. So, yeah, you have
Most definitely. And I've been out before. I was actually in Alabama and I saw this man just going at it with this woman. I didn't know if it was his wife, his child. I just didn't know. But I waited till I got safely down the road and I called 911 and I reported it because I didn't want to read later that this woman was killed.
Right. Right.
My conscience would not allow me to leave that alone. So you have to be cautious. You have to make sure you're safe. And when you go, like you said, you went to a friend's house with your kids, you've got to be careful not to put other people in harm's way while you're trying to get away safe yourself.
Yeah. There's so many variables to domestic violence and getting away. And I think you touched on this earlier about making sure you have a nucleus of people who generally are concerned about you. This particular lady, whom I'm speaking about, that I went to live with, I met her through him. But when I tell you that lady had my back, because he did come to her house looking for me. She didn't
Wow.
be being there. She's not here. I haven't seen her. Listen, my baby's car seat was in the living room and he could see it. And he said to her, "There's my baby's car seat right there." She said, "That's not her car seat. That's somebody else's." So she protected me. And in the middle of the night, though, I left her house because I did not want to put her in harm's way. I did not. She asked me not to leave, but I waited till she was asleep. I called a taxi, and me and my children got in that taxi and we went to a shelter because I didn't want to put her in harm's way.
Hmm. And they will track you down.
Yeah.
They will track you down. So
We have a lot of gentlemen that are commenting too. This is Mr. Chansey, a friend of mine. You have to strategically, and he did find a champion that will help you get out of the situation safely. You are absolutely right. We've been speaking about that as well. So before we leave, I want to say that again, we will be all month long on From Soul Pieces to Soul Peace and on Miss Sabrina's page. For those of you who may not be familiar with her, she does have a Facebook page. She is a champion for domestic violence. She speaks out against domestic violence, and she posts. She has interesting posts or informative posts on her page too. So if you're not a friend of hers, please check her page out on From Soul Pieces to Soul Peace all month long. We will be showcasing stories. This is just to bring awareness. I think the theme for domestic violence awareness for 2022 is everyone knows someone. There may be some information, a little bit of information that may be useful for someone who is currently in a domestic violence situation. It's not as easy as we've been discussing to tell someone to get out. They already know they need to get out. It's how they're going to get out that becomes the issue. One of the comments I saw earlier said, not only do you have to have a plan A, you have to have a plan B, just in case this person is smart, because listen, they don't want to lose power. So of course they're going to do what they can to try to keep you in place. And therefore, like Sabrina said, they become a Mr. Sleuth. They may be privy to your plan A. Therefore, you have to have a backup plan and possibly a backup plan for your backup plan. Nevertheless, next week, I do believe, I don't have the information in front of me, but I will be broadcasting it on the page. We will have another interview with a thriver, a survivor. We do have a lineup of other advocates coming on as well. And you never know, Miss Sabrina just may be back and share some other information with us. Thank you so much for interviewing me, making me very comfortable in this situation. You made an uncomfortable situation very comfortable. So thank you so much for that.
thank you for allowing me to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, we have definitely stayed over longer than we wanted to. Thank you, Miss Sabrina, for extending your time with us. I do appreciate you. Thank you for all of our viewers. Thank you all for sharing this broadcast as well. I really do appreciate you guys, and we hope to see you later. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay.